Hello, dear friend. Thank you for hanging out with a couple of multiples today. We are your hosts, Drew
and Garden System. We are a married couple that both have dissociative identity disorder, or DID.
The reality of living with multiplicity is nothing like what you might see in the movies or on soap operas. This mental health condition often goes unnoticed, even by mental health professionals. Did you know that someone with DID spends an average of 6 to 12 years in the mental health system before receiving a correct diagnosis? This is because there is still a prevailing belief, even among clinicians, that DID is rare. The truth is that there are around 120 million people all over the world that meet the criteria according to the DSM-5.
We are glad that you are here to learn all about dissociative identity disorder. Whether you are someone living with multiplicity, a supporter, or a mental health professional, you are making a difference by choosing to listen to this podcast today. You can help dispel myths about DID and help spread awareness by sharing this podcast with a friend or loved one.
Please visit acoupleofmultiples.com and sign up for our mailing list to learn all about our private paid community called Hearts Multiplied on the Circle platform. If you're enjoying this podcast, please consider giving us a 5-star review. And for our Apple listeners, we would really appreciate you leaving us a written review.
Together, we can make a difference by taking the disorder out of dissociative identities. We are honored to have a Gold Plus sponsor for Season 2.
The Institute for Creative Mindfulness is one of the largest EMDR therapy training programs in North America, founded and directed by Dr. Jamie Pless-Marich, author of Dissociation Made Simple. Dr. Jamie is the only EMDR therapy trainer who is out as a plural, and since 2015, she's offered the full EMDR therapy basic training in a way that honors lived experience and destigmatizes dissociation in clinical work.
We have never felt more accepted and validated as a multiple than when we were able to show up authentically as Garden System for our basic EMDR training. Having lived experience is valued and respected in these training courses.
Go to www.instituteforcreativemindfulness.com for a full list of upcoming trainings, both online and in person, offered by Dr. Jamie and her selected network of EMDR trainers.
Are you interested in becoming a sponsor? Please send an email to admin@acoupleofmultiples.com to request more information.
Hello, dear friends, and welcome to another delightful episode with Drew
and Garden System, a couple of multiples, the reality of dissociative identity disorder. This week, we are super excited to continue sharing all about internal communication. We are going to share personal stories about how we brought all of ourselves close together to improve our internal communication and how that led to our ability to switch when we wanted to or needed to.
We know that may sound funny, switching on purpose, but it's very useful when a certain part has mad skills that are needed for something particular that yous are doing.
Yep. Being able to switch to someone who has the right strengths and skills can be really important. Using your internal communication skills can help with this process of getting the right self to take the wheel. One of the most frustrating experiences is when you need one of yourselves and they are nowhere to be found.
Yeah, I'm sure our listeners enjoyed hearing the example you gave in our very last episode of what happened when Leanna wasn't anywhere to be found when you needed to crunch some numbers at work.
That was a rough day for our other adult, Victoria, for sure. When we were newly diagnosed, our switching just happened randomly and we never knew who was going to be fronting. That made maintaining daily functioning extremely difficult. These days, though, our switching is done with a lot more consideration for everyone in the system, even though we still switch a lot and often. It was a process of learning all about each other and healing a lot of trauma to get to where we are today.
As a system, we may not really realize what causes switching, and honestly, we may not notice when we switch sometimes, especially if you experience amnesia or time loss. You can't remember what you don't remember, right? So, although it may feel like switching may happen randomly, there are probably reasons why someone switches when it does happen more organically. It is helpful to identify possible triggers that may cause your system to become more switchy, as we call it. That way, yous can learn to develop a little more awareness surrounding your switching. Learning to have certain parts out to utilize their unique skills, or switching on purpose, is different than the more organic or what feels like random switching I was just talking about. Being able to call upon parts to front when needed comes about with practice and a lot of trial and error. It will vary from system to system, but I think it would be helpful for Garden System and I to talk about how it happened for us.
One of the very first things we started working on was creating a space in our internal world to try and bring everyone a bit closer together. At first, everyone had their own space inside that seemed to be miles and miles from each other, so it was difficult to get messages to everyone. We tried a myriad of options to bring everyone together.
When I hear you say the words, bring everyone a bit closer together, and at first everyone had their own space inside that seemed to be miles and miles from each other, it reminds me that our parts or other selves within a DID system often begin very separate from each other, with barriers between one another to help protect us from the trauma we were experiencing. Splitting up the trauma into many separate pieces and storing the information across many different parts makes sense. It helped all of us survive the unbearable. But now, when we approach this healing phase, what we are ultimately trying to do to gain functionality is bring those barriers down and bring all the information that was stored separately closer together and into awareness. The process of bringing the barriers down is a difficult one. It's often hard to get to know and meet your others inside, not to mention become aware of what information about your life they hold. Okay, Garden System, continue about how you personally brought your parts closer together and brought those barriers down.
Well, it was a lot of trial and error. We first had this cabin by a lake with a sandy beach, and that got Daisy, Maisie, and Victoria together at least. Then we tried adding a gazebo near the cabin and invited everyone to come. That brought in a couple of our other adults, Kilara and Leanna. The littles, however, were not really fans of the gazebo and were too restless, which made having internal meetings there rather difficult. We then added swing sets next to the gazebo so the littles could be still and in movement at the same time.
Hey, I get it. I'd totally come around for the chance to play on swings.
And that sufficed for a little while. What we noticed, though, is that Leanna and Kilara rarely came to the cabin or the gazebo, and they were our most functional adult selves. So our therapist had the brilliant idea of building a house close to where Leanna and Kilara hung out in the internal world. Leanna agreed to have this house built and enticed the littles by adding horses and a stable to this internal property. Even with the lure of horses, the littles were still reluctant to move into this newer house as they were quite attached to their old rooms. When Sadie came on the scene, she suggested making the rooms in the house like replicas of their original rooms. And this appeared to work at first. But Jenny, our 4-year-old self, would not stay in the house. She would visit, but she would always leave to go back to her old place. Only no one seemed to know where that was.
Kind of sounds purposeful. Maybe Jenny wasn't ready to really reveal information or be close for too long to your others yet. This stuff definitely doesn't happen overnight. And what Garden System is describing here is the use of imagination to add things to her internal landscape to bring her parts closer together and to get to know them better, which eventually leads to having your others closer by in a more permanent way. It makes it easier for others to know what's happening in your current life, even if they are not the ones out in the body at any given moment. Practicing seeing out through the body's eyes while another part is out in the body makes more parts aware of the present moment. It helps more of yous know when they might be needed and make them easier to contact when coming out into the body makes sense, when their skill or knowledge can be utilized. This is how one begins being able to switch on purpose, as we like to call it.
Well, what we didn't know was how Jenny was still stuck in trauma time, technically. We discovered her room was in a house, and the house was pretty scary looking, and that led to the identification of an introject hiding out in our system.
Side note, for those of you that are tuning in for the first time and are sitting there wondering what the heck an introject is, an introject is an internal representation of a real life person, typically formulated after a past abuser. Back to you, Garden System.
So Leanna and Keelara basically followed Jenny one day and discovered her sneaking in and out of the house. This introject was like a guard for the house, and Jenny apparently wasn't supposed to be leaving. This house was pretty dark and scary looking inside, and it represented some unhealed trauma that needed to be attended to in therapy. And this trauma was what was keeping ourselves separated from each other.
Makes sense. So Jenny wasn't supposed to be leaving the old house, and her not sticking around the new house for too long led a couple of your others to do some detective work to discover why. All this led to finding out more about your trauma history. Working through trauma memories, processing or reprocessing them is important in order for parts to become closer to one another.
Leanna and Keelara spent a lot of time discussing, quote, battle plans to deal with this house and this introject. Leanna and Keelara had sharp disagreements about how to proceed once we all knew about the house and the introject. He quickly was named the Shadow Man. Keelara wanted to barge in, sword in hand, and clear out the house and take the Shadow Man down. Leanna felt it would be better to negotiate our way in and to explore the house much more slowly. She was much more cautious about entering into a part of the internal world that was unexplored. And this required a lot more patience on Keelara's part as Leanna's plan sort of prevailed.
Oh, wait. Can you explain real quick why or how Leanna's plan prevailed? I mean, we are covering internal communication this season, and a curious mind wonders how this all went down, really.
Because I'm the Amerlin seat, that's why.
Wait, hold up. So does this Amerlin seat business make your opinion more valuable most of the time or just this time? And you might want to explain for our lovely listeners who are tuning in for the first time what this high and mighty seat is exactly.
Okay, so Leanna, Keelara, and Sadie are fictives that come from the world of The Wheel of Time by Robert Jordan. Fictives are alters that come from books, movies, TV shows, etc. And we cover more about fictives in previous episodes. In The Wheel of Time, there is a position of power that is above that of kings and queens, and that is called the Amerlin seat. We do highly recommend that any of you folks out there listening that love fantasy series to read the Wheel of Time books. Just don't watch that monstrosity Amazon attempted to create. So in essence, it is not that my opinion matters more. On the contrary, I really listen to everyone else's opinions and facilitate discussion. Keelara and Sadie will often defer to me because of my position, but it is not one that I hold over them. Keelara did come to agree to my reasoning with a little help from our therapist who happened to also agree with me. If push comes to shove, I can trump the adults in the system, but being power hungry is not what makes a good leader. Aes Sedai, which is what we are called in the books, means servant of all. And the Amerlin seat is the mother of the servants of all. And I actually am the mother of Keelara and Sadie. So there's that too.
Okay, high and mighty mother that listens to all. Gotcha. Thanks for explaining, and please continue about the chosen plan, not to just invade and attack.
Right. I started talking to the Shadow Man and attempting to exert my influence over him. Eventually, the Shadow Man lost his dark and scary facade and became known as Eric. And then he ended up just fading away. He wasn't really another self. He was just a projection of a past abuser, attempting to continue carrying out the trauma internally. Then one day, the whole house was gone, completely bulldozed to the ground, and we're still not sure who exactly brought the house down.
Wow, this is all very mysterious indeed. How do you think Shadow Man lost his dark and scary facade?
Well, I fought him internally. and I won. It was a physical fight, and I used my powers that I have access to in the internal world. It was an intense tussle, and there were times it seemed like he was overpowering me, but he could not win because he was not a self, like the rest of us are. We are more powerful than the introjects of our abusers.
Okay, wait. So you did end up fighting him. So you went into the whole thing slowly, but ended up fighting him like Kilera wanted to do in the first place. Sounds like a team effort, really. And yes, we are more powerful than the introjects of our abusers. This revelation really defeats the fear. And where there is no fear, there is no power held anymore by the fear. Therefore, Shadow Man ended up fading away. Could you explain more about how the whole house was gone one day? And the bulldozing part? Woman, you gotta give us details. We need details.
Woman? Ow, woman, you. Details, yes, details. Okay, you have to know everything, I suppose. Okay. We're not really sure how the house came down. No one was there when it happened. We just saw everything in shambles on the ground. The house was simply no more. It actually felt really good to see it completely bulldozed over. It probably was related to Jenny overcoming her fear using EMDR in therapy. And we've shared that story about her before. Jenny started focusing on her fear that came from the trauma memory rather than the actual trauma memory itself. And once she regained that power back, the flashbacks that had plagued us for years could no longer paralyze us. A powerful, unafraid Jenny. And flashbacks falling flat meant that there was no longer a trauma reenactment happening inside. The house was no longer needed, so it was just gone. Daisy had a brilliant idea, though, and that was to plant a garden where the house had been. Blossom placed an enormous cherry blossom tree at the center, and the entire spot was filled with lush flowers, bushes, trees, butterflies, and birds. Jenny even transformed into a bird inside, which was really a symbolism for freedom. Once that garden was in place, everyone started hanging out there. I mean, really, with our name being Garden System, it really took us a long time to figure out we needed an internal garden to get everyone to gather together.
Aw, see what asking for details got us? A beautiful story. So, after the house was gone, did Jenny come to live in the new house with everyone else?
No, everyone moved to the garden instead.
Heck with a house when there's a garden for Garden System. That's right.
And now that we all hang out together, it's easier to communicate and get the parts out that need to be out. So, how did you get your peeps together?
Well, just like your experience, it was a process. In the beginning, when I was first diagnosed, I was only aware of 2 other parts besides myself. One of my littles, Ramona, and the part of me that I used to call Karen because she was annoying, eating the entire contents of the refrigerator. I figured out Ramona was there because she used black Sharpie to write her name Ramona on everything that she didn't want me taking into my classroom. I later found out that the coloring books, school supplies, and toys she claimed as hers, she didn't want them to come back broken, used, or with missing parts. So finding Ramona written on a lot of our things is how I discovered her. She knew I couldn't take those items into the classroom after she wrote her name with Sharpie on them without receiving a ton of questions we didn't feel comfortable answering at the time. Smart cookie. And then the part I used to kind of meanly call Karen, it was easy to discover her because of all the wrappers and missing food, and no one else ate it in the house, so it was me apparently. Except it wasn't me. Yeah, those are the types of things that make it hard to deny DID. We will get to the denial topic and acceptance of having a DID system in our next episode, the season finale. So, in the beginning of therapy, we knew very little, but once our therapist started asking questions, that's when the real fun began because we started talking. And the talking is what caused some of our parts to come up from the undead world to stop us from talking. You know, because talking or telling isn't allowed.
So, talking started bringing you all together. Where was this undead world and where was it in relation to the other spaces in your internal world?
Well, I wouldn't have said that talking in therapy is what started bringing us all together. It felt like that's what started some big time turmoil and chaos. But when I really think about it, talking in therapy is what started bringing us closer together, even if the result felt like we had poked an angry bear.
Oh, this is so true. At first, it can feel like complete chaos and super overwhelming when more and more selves come forward and start talking. It is a lot of extra energy in the body for sure.
The truth is, I didn't even know the undead world existed internally until us, everyday house parts that handle daily life, started talking in therapy. My gatekeeper, Feeny, also known as the Dark Phoenix, I've talked about her in previous episodes, came up and out of the undead world with another little she called Ashley, and made it be known that he, meaning the voice, would attack us if we answered questions or continued to talk.
Yeah, talking in therapy can rock the boat, so to speak, and that sounds pretty scary. The voice, that is. So where was this undead world and the voice?
We soon figured out from Feeny, after our therapist carefully gathered information from her, that the undead world was located underground, and the entrance to this place underground was deep in a dark wooded forest beneath the trunk of a very large, gnarly-looking tree. This forest is quite a distance from the house that our everyday parts live in. You have to cross a large grassy meadow between the house and the forest to get to the undead world. The tree that marks the entrance to the undead world is quite distinct, but also hard to find because, well, it's one of many trees deep in the forest.
So if it is under a tree, how do you all get to it? Who was the first to go in and explore this place that didn't come from there?
Good questions. No one ever went there to explore. We ended up going there eventually, but there was no wandering there to explore. It was obviously too dangerous. Feeny made this known by her descriptions and the fact that she already viewed herself as dead, and that if we talked or if she didn't do her job by stopping us, the voice would make us all dead, meaning more than dead, like non-existent. Feeny spoke of a cemetery where the remains of the dead were, and talked about others that ended up there. The angels in our system were the first to find and hold the undead world, and all my others that were from there in light. The first time this happened was when things were getting too chaotic, and it was interfering with my ability to hold down a job and be functional. The angels were central to creating internal peace in general.
So where did these angels come from, and how were things getting so chaotic? Can you tell us more about this light?
Well, yes. The angels are one of my very favorite things to talk about. I think the short answer is that the angels and my awareness of them existed for me at a very young age. I first remember them appearing when the body was 6 years old. I had decided that I would be better off with God, and my plan brought me the feeling of relief that I needed. Before I was going to end my life, one night when I had fallen asleep, I saw the angels, and one of them said to me not to be afraid, that everything would be okay, and that I was loved. The angels have been a part of my life ever since. I used to view the angels as helpers outside of myself, but now I tend to view them as a part of myself, almost like my higher self. Tapping into my high vibrational energy is exactly what I need when things have and once in a while still do feel chaotic. At the time, learning about my others in the beginning of therapy, gathering more information, discovering my trauma history bit by bit, was what was causing chaos. My system was designed not to be explored or uncovered, and doing the opposite of that by exploring and uncovering it was what was causing chaos. We had to go about this very carefully and very slowly. It's been 14 years of doing this work, and now we are at a point where the undead world does not exist anymore the way it once was. The voice has now faded away, as you put it, Garden System, when you were talking about your shadow man. And the tree that was once a scary, gnarly monstrosity is blossoming and full of life, as is the entire forest.
I think it is important that we review the importance of doing this work carefully and slowly. Our internal worlds and the places that hold trauma were meant to hide it for sure, and exploring it can be destabilizing. This really is why Leanna was much slower about going into that house. These things take careful planning and time before exploring and picking them apart. This is very true for those that have survived ritual abuse, mind control, and organized abuse. I want to reiterate for those listening that these explorations and changes took place over several years of therapy with many ups and downs in our functionality. How did you get the undead world to change? And tell us more about how the voice disappeared.
Getting to know all of your daily life house parts first was key. And in the meantime, getting more information from Feeny, getting her to form a bond and trust with our therapist first, and then over a long period of time, getting Feeny to see the deception, the lies, our trauma, getting her to stop attacking us by seeing that she was really hurting us, not protecting us anymore, having her become our fiercest protector and learn what actually protects us lowly humans, that she was needed and wanted and belongs. Many other undead parts ended up surfacing, as did the voice himself. He burned down the house at one point. It was really chaotic. But this had to happen in order for us to know more and eventually be able to change the undead world and discover that our strength and love combined was more powerful than the fear that once made the undead world and the voice powerful.
Whoa, oh my. The house was burned down? We need to hear more about that.
Yes, well, at this point, Feeny had revealed too much information. She was in the process of switching sides, so to speak, becoming more of a house part than an undead part, and the voice was not having it. He captured her many times, which I will not go into detail about. And then, yes, he eventually came all the way to the house and burned it down to try to stop us. Feeny protected us, and so did the angels. That's when we visualized the angels putting a force field around ourselves so the undead couldn't attack us. They eventually went back to the undead world, but there were many, many invasions during the course of healing our trauma, and other undead parts that didn't go back to the undead world, and we got to know more about them too because of it. So what might appear as setbacks and attacks actually have silver linings. More and more barriers came down by these things happening. Plus, we were learning to work as a team the whole time.
They often feel like setbacks for sure. None of this work of bringing everyone together is easy. Leanna pretty much single-handedly fought the Shadow Man, but you had like whole armies fighting. There is resistance, and there are these introjects trying to prevent this healing work from happening. And doing the trauma work with EMDR, art therapy, sand tray therapy, and even just talking to our therapist creates all sorts of rifts inside. Clearing out these dark places in the internal world allows everyone to come together, but it's tough work.
Towards the end of our trauma work, we did quite a few visualizations of going to the undead world with the angels and their light and facing what was there and facing the voice. I'd say us not being afraid anymore took the voice's power, and that's what made him not exist anymore. That's when the undead world transformed into something beautiful. The love and understanding of each other and our combined strength and knowledge that we are greater than our trauma history is what changed everything.
With a lot of trauma now resolved and the major internal world changes, everyone can feel safe enough to communicate with everyone else. We don't have to have secrets from each other anymore. Jenny had been our main secret keeper about trauma, but now that her fear is gone and that house is gone, she doesn't seem to mind too much about what everyone else knows about our trauma history. And this allows her to be okay when our other selves want to be out in the body too. She is much more willing to make room for them to see out of the eyes with her. And this recently happened when we were at Disney and riding Dinosaur. Blossom and Daisy love Dinosaur, but it's a bit scary for Jenny. Jenny always has a hard time letting Blossom and or Daisy be out for this ride because they weren't properly scared of it. So she had to be out in the body to hold that fear. Her fear in general, though, has really been worked on through EMDR therapy, and she sort of just slid over and allowed Blossom to experience the ride with her. So we experienced co-consciousness between the two of them.
I think having your others practice seeing out through the body's eyes when another part is actually in the body is one way to experience co-consciousness. Both parts, or even more than two parts, can see what is happening as if they are really there, because they are really there, experiencing what is happening together. Our therapist used to ask us, "Can so-and-so see out through the eyes right now and hear a conversation?" When she asked us this, we practiced. She would ask things like, "Who all is here right now listening?" Or, "Who do you think could benefit from being here right now?" And we would name off parts, and we would practice all being there together at the same time for therapy sessions.
Our therapist would ask us things like, "Who would you like to be here right now? Can you ask them to come be with you?" This was also something she would ask when we would do EMDR. We could invite certain selves to be present when one of us was doing the trauma work. Asking for permission and inviting yourselves is a good first step to practicing co-consciousness.
So one might be asking, how does all this co-consciousness stuff and getting to know all about other selves and doing trauma work to bring down barriers between yourselves help with the ability to switch on purpose when needed? Well, knowing who is in your system and identifying what their strengths are and having your others be aware of what's going on in the here and now makes it possible to call on them in times when they could help in your life situations. So, garden system, how do you call upon others when their skill set is most appropriate?
And this is where Leanna is in charge again. She is the leader, as we have established earlier in this episode, but her leadership style is one of delegation. She basically says, "You would be good at this. Please take care of this." Her and Jenny are very close, and Jenny is our gatekeeper. Since Jenny really trusts Leanna, she helps facilitate the switches too. For those unaware, gatekeepers are parts that have the ability to determine who gets to front and who doesn't. Identifying your gatekeeper and gaining their trust is an important step in being able to switch at will.
And in my experience, not every system has a gatekeeper. You can usually tell if you have one by them blocking access to certain information or blocking other parts from talking or fronting. If this doesn't happen, you might not have a gatekeeper part. For my system, it's usually us communicating to the part of ourselves that we have discovered would be the best at doing something. And in a very similar way that garden system just explained. Basically, "Hey you rock at this. Come out and get it done."
It does take some practice in trying to do it over and over again. We started learning how to recognize how everyone felt when they were fronting. We'd notice extra energy in certain parts of our bodies and certain emotions or behaviors that clued us in that someone else was coming closer to the front. We learned to feel the differences in our bodies depending on who was fronting, and that also helps us to switch into who we need because we know where in the body that part resides.
Yes, getting to know the energy of certain parts really helps identify when a part is close. Also, being able to distinctly hear what other parts are thinking or saying could help with communication and co-consciousness. Sometimes when we are in therapy, our therapist asks, "What does so-and-so think of this?" Or "What are they saying?" And that gave us a chance to listen in and figure out whose voice was whose.
And we also learned what sort of things brought on a switch. For example, we'd let others know that if they needed an adult part out, they could just hand a cleaning wipe over to us, and Victoria would always pop out to start cleaning, and then when she realized she was out, she was good at getting another adult out. We didn't always have good connections between our littles and our adults, but it was easy to get Victoria out with her superwoman vision for dirt, so she became a sort of bridge to help us reach our adult parts when they were needed.
The cleaning wipe kills me, but it's so true. Being certain places also brings on switching for us. Being at work means Lizzie and Journey will be out because they do the teaching. Being at the mall means Pink or Stella will be out because they love shopping. Going by the toy aisle means Ramona or Sparkle or Ashley will be out. So we try to avoid going to that part of the store if we need to get in and out of the store quickly.
So learning what sorts of things, places, and such will help get whoever needs to be out pretty quickly. This is why it's so important to get to know all of yourselves and their likes, dislikes, preferences, and their triggers. Figuring out what upsets them, what makes them front, what makes them tuck away and hide inside will help you learn how to reach them. And it's good to record some of these things down in a journal.
So, in summary, we talked about how to bring everyone closer inside by giving personal examples, and how resolving trauma alters the internal world to make internal communication easier. We also talked about how to practice switching on purpose, and steps that could be taken to achieve consciousness.
And in our season finale,
drum roll please,
we will dive into the denial that many experience, as well as coming to terms with acceptance of one's multiplicity.
We can't wait to talk about this very important topic. Until next time, thank you for hanging out with
A Couple of Multiples. We are honored to have a Gold Plus sponsor for Season 2.
The Institute for Creative Mindfulness is one of the largest EMDR therapy training programs in North America, founded and directed by Dr. Jamie Pless-Marich, author of Dissociation Made Simple. Dr. Jamie is the only EMDR therapy trainer who is out as a plural, and since 2015, she's offered the full EMDR therapy basic training in a way that honors lived experience and destigmatizes dissociation in clinical work.
We have never felt more accepted and validated as a multiple than when we were able to show up authentically as Garden System for our basic EMDR training. Having lived experience is valued and respected in these training courses.
Go to www.instituteforcreativemindfulness.com for a full list of upcoming trainings, both online and in person, offered by Dr. Jamie and her selected network of EMDR trainers. Thank you to our bronze sponsor, Alex Amar, LCSW, who offers weekly creative art classes, including the Creative Journal, Soul Collage, and Altered Books, all on the Zoom platform exclusively for people living with dissociation.
For more information, check out her website at alexamar.com, spelled ALIXAMAR.com, or her Facebook page, Dissociative Creative Explorations. Are you interested in becoming a sponsor? Please send an email to admin@acoupleofmultiples.com to request more information.
From your host, Drew
and Garden System,
thank you for listening to A Couple of Multiples, the reality of dissociative identity disorder. This podcast is intended for educational purposes and is not a replacement for therapy.
Listening to this podcast does not constitute a therapeutic relationship with the hosts or any guest speakers.
If you enjoyed this episode, please leave us a review. We would love to hear what you enjoyed the most.
You can visit our website at acoupleofmultiples.com for additional information, including how to join our new online paid community called Hearts Multiplied, to access additional resources, and to also subscribe to our mailing list to receive future updates.
Remember, you matter and are loved for being all of yous.